As the heir to the throne of Macedonia, Alexander ascended to power at the young age of 20, inheriting a legacy of both political turmoil and military might. What followed was a breathtaking saga of conquest that stretched across 3 continents, reshaping the known world and earning him the epithet the Great. From the shores of Greece to the sun-drenched plains of Persia, from the rugged landscapes of Egypt to the heart of the Indian subcontinent, Alexander's campaigns knew no bounds. His military genius and charismatic leadership forged an empire that spanned from the Mediterranean to the Himalayas, a feat unparalleled in its time. Let's examine Macedonia before Alexander. The primary occupations of the Macedonians were agriculture and animal husbandry. From the 5th century BCE onwards, trade with the Greeks gradually began. In the realm of craftsmanship, large workshops emerged, with workers primarily being slaves. The kings of Lower Macedonia sought to strengthen their power and subdue the entire region. In Greek societies, there was a trend towards the creation of a dictatorial regime, and tyranny was revived. Such a theory of the state was formulated particularly by Aristotle. He categorized all known forms of government into correct ones, that is, those conducive to achieving the common good, and incorrect ones. Among the correct forms, philosophers like Aristotle included monarchy, aristocracy, and polity. Among the incorrect forms were tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy. The key distinction, according to Aristotle, lies in the fact that in the former case, the best are in power in the state, caring for the welfare of society, while in the latter, rulers think only of their own benefit. In the context of the situation in Greece, Aristotle considered polity, the dominance of the middle class in society, to be the most acceptable. Aristotle anticipated the creation of such a system and its spread in Greece from a single person endowed with the necessary power, Alexander. In late July 356 BCE, Olympias, the wife of the Macedonian ruler Philip II, gave birth to a son named Alexander. According to legend, Alexander was born on the very day when Herostratus set fire to the famous Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. When Alexander turned 13, Aristotle was invited to be his tutor. Alexander spent 3 years with friends, particularly close to Hephaestion, in Mysa, listening to Aristotle's lectures. Alexander highly valued Aristotle and considered the knowledge gained from his teacher to set him apart from his peers. Alexander's childhood and his education with Aristotle coincided with a time when Philip II was striving for dominance in Macedonia and its transformation into the hegemon of the Greek world. During this conflict, Philip substantially reorganized the Macedonian army. The primary striking force of the cavalry was the companions, heteroi, armed with a sword and a long spear known as a sarissa. They wore a helmet without a crest and a short cuirass. The main contingent of the Macedonian infantry consisted of foot companions, pegetiroi. They carried a large bronze shield, a short sword with a broad blade, a dagger, and a sarissa. The infantry also included hypaspists, formerly warriors of lower rank. A particular role in Philip's army was held by light-armed infantry, peltasts, as well as dart-throwers, archers, and slingers. The battle formation was called a phalanx, a column with a depth of up to 24 rows, with a distance of about a meter between them in attack and half a meter in defense. Warriors in the phalanx extended their spears forward, shielding themselves with shields. On the flanks, the phalanx was protected by cavalry units. Thanks to this strategy, the phalanx was a mobile fortress, difficult to breach, sweeping away everything in its path. In 340 BC, while conducting another war in Thrace, he interrupted Alexander's education in Mysa and entrusted him with the governance of state affairs during his absence. Alexander successfully passed the maturity exam given to him. During his brief rule, he had to deal with a revolt of the Medes, a small ethnic group living in the mountains north of Paeonia. Alexander quelled the uprising, captured the Median city, and expelled the local inhabitants. Then, after resettling the deserted city with diverse people, he named it after himself, Alexandropolis. In the autumn of 339 BC, Philip II marched his troops into central Greece, posing a direct threat to Thebes and Athens. The decisive battle between Thebes, Athens and their allies on one side, and the Macedonians on the other, occurred on August 2, 338 BC, and is known as the Battle of Chaeronea. The Allied forces were arranged with their right flank extending to the river and the left positioned slightly southeast of Chaeronea. The Thebans stood on the right flank, Corinthian mercenaries, Achaeans and others in the center, and Athenians on the left flank. Among the Macedonians, Alexander led the cavalry on the left flank. Philip himself was on the right flank, facing the Athenians. The battle involved a total of 30,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry on each side. The main attack on the enemy was led by Alexander, who, commanding the Macedonian cavalry, infiltrated the ranks of the Thebans. This battle played an exceptional role in Alexander's biography. Displaying remarkable determination and skill, his actions secured victory and Macedonian dominance in Greece. In the late 338 BC, Philip II, desiring to give his rule in Greece certain legitimate forms, invited representatives from all Greek cities to Corinth. Philip's main goal was to lead a pan-Greek war against Persia and punish the Persians for desecrating Greek sanctuaries. This treaty became known as the Corinthian League. However, Philip II was not destined to complete the task he had initiated. A scandal erupted in the royal family. Philip parted ways with Olympias, suspecting her of marital infidelity, and married Cleopatra, the niece of Attalus. During the wedding feast, Attalus, heated by wine, began urging the Macedonians to implore the gods to grant a legitimate heir to the royal power from Philip and Cleopatra. Alexander's position and his life were in jeopardy. Unable to contain his rage, he shouted at Attalus, "And do you, vile creature, consider us illegitimate?" Philip rushed at his son with a drawn sword, but stumbled and fell. The confrontation with his father showed Alexander that by remaining at the royal court, he was exposing himself and his mother to mortal danger. In 336 BC, during Cleopatra's wedding, the daughter of Philip II, to Alexander, the prominent yet very young Macedonian Pausanias killed the Macedonian ruler. The death of Philip II opened the path to power for Alexander. In Greece, the death of Philip II set in motion all anti-Macedonian forces. Alexander's calls to Greek cities, urging them to remain favorable to him as they were to his father, did not achieve significant success. Alexander accompanied his conciliatory speeches with an impressive show of force. After completing a challenging march, his troops entered Boeotia and stationed themselves near Cadmea. This proved sufficient to paralyze resistance from both Thebes and Athens. The latter sent envoys to Alexander with apologies for not immediately recognizing the new Macedonian king as the hegemon of all Greece. In the spring of 335 BC, Alexander the Great embarked on a campaign against the Illyrians and the Triballi, who were historical adversaries of Macedonia. Alexander's successes in these campaigns secured dominance for him in the northern Balkan peninsula. The king of the Triballi and the Gauls living near the Ionian Gulf approached him with an offer to form an alliance and establish friendly relations. Alexander willingly accepted this proposal as he needed allies for his upcoming expedition into Persia. Meanwhile, events demanded that Alexander hurriedly returned to Greece. Anti-Macedonian demonstrations began again there. Thebes became the center of this movement. It all began with the fact that in Greece spread a rumor that the Macedonians were defeated by tribals and Alexander himself died. This rumor was especially vigorously supported by Demosthenes. Rebellion in Thebes served as a signal for unrest in other cities. The Thebans appealed for help in Arcadia, Argos, to the Eleans, and Athens. Demosthenes, from his personal funds, gave them money to buy weapons. Alexander did not wait long. It took him only 13 days, leaving Thrace, to invade Boeotia and begin the assault on Thebes. The death of Thebes, one of the largest cities in Greece, the transformation into slaves of all the surviving inhabitants, left the country in a state of shock. More than 30,000 captured people were sold into slavery. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander crossed into Asia. The crossing of the Hellespont required a substantial fleet, with the forces navigating the water obstacle accommodated on 160 ships. Upon landing, Alexander headed towards the ruins of Troy. From Troy, he proceeded to Arisbe, where his entire army was stationed. The Persian forces opposing Alexander were positioned near the Granicus River under the command of local satraps and the Greek Memnon. The battle took place at the Granicus River, which flows into the Propontis, modern-day Sea of Marmara. The river was about 60 feet wide, with swift currents and steep banks, which the Persians believed would give them an advantage. The Persian cavalry positioned themselves on the riverbank, with the mercenary infantry behind them. The Persian cavalry couldn't advance due to the riverbanks, nor could they retreat because of the infantry's placement. The battle was lost for the Persians before it even began. Out of 5,000 Greek mercenaries, only 2,000 survived, and they were sent to Macedonia to work in the mines. The rest were killed. War spoils, including gold and rich fabrics, were sent home to Alexander's mother, Olympias. To honor the memory of all those who died in battle, Alexander buried both Greek and Persian soldiers. According to modern estimates, the Persians lost 20% of their forces and 2/3 of their commanders in the battle. From Granicus, Alexander headed towards Sardis, one of the most important political centers in Asia Minor. As he approached the city, many cities in the region, realizing the might of the Macedonian army, chose to surrender without resistance. During his stay in Sardis, Alexander decided to build a temple and altar to Zeus Olympios on the Acropolis. Not all Greek cities accepted the authority of Alexander willingly, with the exception of Miletus, a crucial port on the Aegean Sea and a significant economic and cultural center. However, even Miletus succumbed to a siege by Alexander. Later, Persian naval commanders briefly regained control of Miletus, and Alexander's commanders had to recapture it. Alexander disbanded his naval fleet shortly after taking Miletus. The Macedonian king lacked the resources to maintain the fleet, and he recognized that the Greco-Macedonian fleet couldn't compete with the Persians at sea. Under these circumstances, he saw an advantage in cutting off the possibility for his troops to return home, forcing them to achieve victories to avoid facing destruction. Another city that offered resistance to Alexander was Halicarnassus, one of the most reliable strongholds of Persian dominance. The defense of Halicarnassus was led by Memnon, whom Darius III appointed as the ruler of Lower Asia and the commander of the entire Persian fleet. A fierce battle occurred at the city gates. The people of Halicarnassus closed them too early, preventing their own warriors from returning to the city. The besieged, especially Memnon, realized the futility of further resistance. Unwilling to surrender, they set fire to the weapon depots, structures near the city walls, and fled. The entire western part of Asia Minor was now in the hands of Alexander. However, the Battle of Granicus, sieges and assaults, along with the necessity of maintaining garrisons in various locations, had reduced the size of his army. Hoping to gain popularity among his soldiers, Alexander sent newlywed warriors back to their homeland to spend the winter with their families. In the spring, they were expected to return, bringing with them new fighters, both Macedonians and Greeks. The Persians' failure at the Battle of Granicus and Alexander's subsequent victories in Asia Minor demonstrated the real threat posed to the Achaemenid Empire by the Macedonian invasion. Now, Memnon decided to shift the war to Greece and compel Alexander to return home. However, in the midst of the siege, Memnon suddenly passed away. Darius himself assumed command of the forces and began assembling a new army to confront Alexander on the approaches to Syria. The Greco-Macedonian forces stood at the threshold of Syria, preparing to advance further into the heart of the Achaemenid Empire. Darius's forces were positioned in Syria, not far from the Assyrian gates. They held a favorable position on a large plain, allowing the Persian command to deploy all their contingents for battle. The massacre began. Alexander attempted to break through to Darius III and sustained a wound to his thigh. The battle became known as the Battle of Issus. Darius III lost all control over his massive army. Taking advantage of a gap that had formed in the ranks of the combatants, he fled. Persian warriors, those who did not fall into captivity, scattered. The Battle of Issus made Alexander the master of the entire eastern Mediterranean region. Darius III hastily retreated across the Euphrates. He arrived in Babylon and began the formation of a new army. Alexander himself headed to the Phoenician coast. The ruler who established dominion in Phoenicia gained control over almost the entire trade in the Near East. Possession of the Phoenician fleet turned him into the master of the eastern part of the Mediterranean. Alexander's entry into Phoenicia was marked by the surrender of the city of Arvad. From there, he moved on to Marathus. Emerging victorious from Marathus, Alexander easily seized Byblos. Another important city in southern Phoenicia, Sidon, where anti-Persian sentiments had long been strong, also opened its gates to Alexander. The conquest of Phoenicia progressed with little difficulty, but Alexander suddenly faced resistance from Tyre. Tyre refused to acknowledge the supreme authority of the Macedonian conqueror. Alexander made another attempt to resolve the matter peacefully. However, the Tyrians killed his envoys, throwing their bodies into the sea. Alexander decided to besiege the city, recognizing that without a fleet, capturing Tyre would be impossible. He needed ships and set out to obtain them from Sidon. Possession of a fleet allowed Alexander to dramatically change the course of the siege. The walls of Tyre crumbled under the blows of the battering ram. Alexander's warriors captured the towers, and they stormed into the city through the breach. The Macedonian fleet entered the harbor. Alexander ordered the killing of everyone except those who sought refuge in the temples. For the first time in its over 3,000-year history, Tyre succumbed to the conqueror's will. Alexander successfully broke the resistance of this city. The capture and destruction of Tyre led the population of Palestine to acknowledge Alexander's authority. However, Alexander faced significant challenges with the position of Gaza, which blocked his path to Egypt. The ruler of Gaza, Battis, hired Arab mercenaries, concentrated substantial food supplies in the city, and prepared for a prolonged siege. After a 2-month-long siege, the Macedonians managed to destroy part of the defensive structures. Alexander, following intense street battles, seized control of the city. During one of the clashes, Alexander was wounded in the shoulder by a catapult. The inhabitants fought until the last person. The men were slaughtered, and Alexander sold the women and children into slavery. On his further journey to Egypt and within Egypt itself, long hostile to Persian rule, Alexander encountered no resistance. When he appeared in the Nile Valley, the Egyptians greeted him with jubilation as a liberator from the despised oppression. Sending ships up the Nile to Memphis, Alexander crossed the Arabian desert and arrived in Heliopolis, then proceeded to Memphis. In the ancient capital of Egypt, he was crowned as the Egyptian pharaoh. In the lower reaches of the Nile, Alexander founded a city that continues to exist and plays a crucial role in the economic and political life of Egypt to this day: Alexandria. In 331 BCE, having secured and strengthened his rear, Alexander led his army into the heart of the Persian Empire. After crossing the Tigris, Alexander found the Persian army led by Darius. The Battle of Gaugamela took place on October 1st, 331 BCE. The battle began with an attack of chariots, which Darius had high hopes for. The Macedonians prepared to face them. Part of the horses went astray due to the shouts and noise raised by the phalanx, turned back, and inflicted damage on their own troops. Another part of the horses and charioteers was attacked by the light infantry of the Macedonians. Due to the concentration of Persian cavalry on Alexander's right flank, a gap formed in the front line of the Persian army, into which Alexander directed his strike with the companion cavalry and some supporting infantry. The strike was aimed at King Darius himself. The Persian left flank began to crumble and retreat. Seeing this, Darius decided to flee, after which his forces followed suit. Moving at great speed, accompanied by a small elite force, Alexander caught up with the fleeing Persians on the road from Media to Parthia. Satraps, led by Bessus, killed Darius to prevent him from falling into the hands of the enemy alive, and then continued their escape. After the victory at Gaugamela, Alexander became the sole ruler in the Near East. Babylon and the local Persian authorities supported him. The capital of the empire, Persepolis, became a key point for consolidating his power. Approaching the capital, Alexander encountered Greeks who had been living there since being resettled by Persian kings, many of whom had been disfigured by the Persians. Persepolis was declared the most hostile city, and Alexander allowed his troops to plunder it. He spent 4 months in the city, hosting feasts and revelries. In late May of 330 BC, during one of the feasts, the hetaira Thais suggested burning down the royal palace as a noble act. Alexander set it ablaze, destroying religious works and artworks that had been preserved for centuries. The months between the Battle of Gaugamela in autumn 331 BC and Darius III's death in summer 330 BC were arguably the peak of Alexander's life. He destroyed the powerful Persian Empire, conquered many peoples, and avenged Greece for its suffering in the Greco-Persian Wars. In several battles, Alexander's small army defeated much larger enemies. At just 26 years old, he had Asia at his feet, Greece subdued, and a promising future ahead. After Darius III's death, Alexander aimed to consolidate his control in eastern Iran. He appointed a trusted individual as satrap of Parthia and Hyrcania. Moving into Hyrcania, he targeted Greek mercenaries who had served Darius. Crossing mountains into Hyrcania, he seized Zadrakata before advancing into Aria. During this time, in Bactria, where Bess fled with his allies, a new resistance against the Macedonian invaders arose. Bess, the satrap of Bactria and Sogdiana, of royal lineage and a veteran of the Battle of Gaugamela, led an anti-Macedonian movement, claiming himself as the king of Asia like Alexander. The harsh terrain, including high mountains and deep snow, posed challenges, but Alexander marched alongside his soldiers, aiding those struggling in the snow. Overcoming this obstacle, he entered Bactria, while Bess retreated into Sogdiana after crossing the Oxus River. Alexander needed to cross the Oxus to capture Bess in Nautica. Before attempting the river crossing, he sent back all unfit Macedonian soldiers. On the way, envoys from Spitamenes offered to hand over Bess if Alexander sent a small detachment. Following his orders, Bess was brought stripped and chained. Alexander ordered him whipped, then sent him to Bactra and finally to Ecbatana for execution after mutilating him. The army of Alexander marched towards Maracanda, modern-day Samarkand, the capital of Sogdiana. In the city, Alexander the Great encountered resistance from local rulers. Despite initial challenges, Alexander's forces ultimately conquered the city. This victory played a decisive role in strengthening his control over Central Asia. From Maracanda, Alexander moved towards the river known to locals as Auxant, modern-day Sirdaria. Suddenly, he was informed of a rebellion erupting in Sogdiana and Bactria, where Macedonian garrisons were being slaughtered in the cities. The rebellion of the cities was brutally suppressed by the Macedonians. To solidify his control over the conquered territory, Alexander decided to execute a long-standing plan and found a city on the banks of the Auxant. This city became known as Alexandria Eschate. Winter arrived, and Alexander stationed his garrisons in Sogdiana while settling in Nautica for the season. In the spring of 328-27 BCE, he headed towards the Sogdian Rock, where many locals had gathered. When offered surrender, Alexander heard mocking cries challenging him to find winged warriors to conquer the rock. Capturing the Sogdian Rock became a matter of prestige. Among the surrendered were women and children, including Roxana, daughter of Oxyates. Alexander, smitten by her at a feast hosted by Oxyates seeking reconciliation, married her. In late spring of 327 BCE, Alexander embarked on his campaign into India with a reinforced army of 120,000 soldiers, 3 times larger than his initial force in Asia Minor. The primary goal was to annex the western regions of the Indus Valley, which were part of the easternmost territory of the Achaemenid Empire. Porus, ruling a vast kingdom, awaited Alexander's forces on the eastern bank of the river. An attempt by Porus's son to obstruct Alexander's crossing ended in defeat and the commander's death. Porus himself led a force of around 4,000 horsemen, 300 chariots, 200 elephants, and 30,000 infantry to confront Alexander. His troops were arranged with chariots and cavalry on the flanks, infantry in the center, and elephants forming the front line. The elephants disrupted Alexander's infantry, while Porus's cavalry attacked his horsemen. Despite this, Alexander's troops managed to drive the elephants into a confined space, where they turned against the Indian forces. Porus, showing remarkable bravery, was eventually captured. This battle occurred in April-May 326 BCE. On the banks of the Hydaspes, Alexander founded 2 new cities, Nicaea and Bucephala. He then headed towards the Ganges River, intending to invade the Ganges Valley. However, he faced unexpected opposition from his soldiers and even his commanders, who were reluctant to continue eastward. The exhausting 8-year campaign had drained the morale of the troops, and they saw no point in risking their lives further. Alexander tried to lift their spirits by promising vast riches and the prospect of conquering the entire world, but he couldn't find volunteers to continue the journey eastward. Eventually, after 3 days of isolation in his tent, Alexander was forced to announce that he would not lead his army any further east. Thus, Alexander's conquest campaign on the banks of the Hydaspes River came to an end in 326 BCE when he was 30 years old. During the conflict between the Indus and the Hydaspes, Alexander conceived a plan to transform his Macedonian Asian empire into a monarchy spanning the civilized world. However, on the banks of the Hydaspes, he suddenly realized that his victories in India were in vain, lacking the strength to retain his conquests. The necessity to abandon his dream of global dominance was a heavy personal blow for Alexander. Unsure of his next move, Alexander's subsequent actions indicated not only a refusal to advance into the Ganges Valley, but also to relinquish lands east of the Indus, confining himself to the Asian Empire, taken from the Achaemenids. His retreat was accompanied by elaborate ceremonies, aimed at portraying it as a withdrawal before the gods rather than a defeat before men. In the last year of his life, Alexander's actions demonstrated his ongoing policy of uniting the diverse population of his vast empire under his reign. While in Susa, he organized a grand wedding ceremony, following Persian customs, where 10,000 Macedonian soldiers married Persian and other Asian women. Each newlywed couple received lavish gifts. Among the grooms was Alexander himself, who had previously married Roxana. Now he married Statira, the daughter of Darius III, and Parysatis, the daughter of Artaxerxes III, Ochus. Hephaestion was to marry Drypetus, also a daughter of Darius III. Alexander sought to strengthen his friendly relations with him by including his descendants in the royal family. After returning from India, Alexander felt strong enough to demand Greek cities proclaim him a god. In the autumn of 324 BCE, we find Alexander in Ecbatana, shaken by the sudden death of Hephaestion, his closest friend and aide. Alexander arranged grand funerals for him, elevating his cult to that of a hero, a lower-tier deity. In the last months of his life, Alexander planned to conquer the entire Mediterranean world. He aimed to defeat Carthage, seize North Africa and Spain, consolidate his presence in Sicily, and even venture as far as the Pillars of Hercules, modern-day Strait of Gibraltar. He had other ambitions, such as exploring the sea, connected to the Caspian Sea, and capturing southern Arabia. Intensive preparations were underway for all these plans. Ships were being built, crews trained in Phoenicia, Syria, and wherever possible. In Babylon, the king ordered the construction of shipyards and the excavation of a vast basin intended to accommodate 1,000 ships. After a banquet, Alexander fell ill. Each day his condition worsened, rendering him unable to speak. Soldiers, concerned, wished to see their king. One by one, they passed by the sickbed of Alexander, who struggled to shake their hands and acknowledge them with his gaze. On June 13th, 323 BCE, during the 114th Olympiad, Alexander passed away.